Okay, well, it's just past 12:01. We are going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to another episode of Lunching with the League. Today, we are excited to have with us Amanda Gonzalez, the Executive Director of Common Cause Colorado. But first, it is my honor and privilege to introduce Catherine Terser today, who will be our moderator. I would be surprised if there were any league members who didn't know Catherine because she is a great friend to the league and an invaluable warrior in the fight for justice and democracy. Catherine is the executive director for Common Cause Ohio. An expert on redistricting reform and state-level campaign finance, Catherine advocates for greater transparency and more accountable government and helped lead Ohio's successful efforts to address gerrymandering. Before joining Common Cause Ohio in April 2012, Catherine was Ohio Citizen Action's legislative director. There, she served as the director of Ohio Citizen Action's Money and Politics Project and co-authored a number of studies tracking campaign finance contributions. In 2006, she received the Spirit of Democracy Award from the Ohio Secretary of State. Catherine has a bachelor's degree from Alfred University and attended the University of Connecticut for graduate work with a focus on social group work and research. Welcome, Catherine.
Yes, hello everybody. I'm just really glad to be here today with Amanda Gonzalez. And so, the way this is set up, as you all know, is we're going to have a conversation with her and ask her a lot of questions. And so as we're going through, I just want to encourage everybody to throw your questions into the chat. And then I will, as we're going along, I'm going to be looking at the chat and thinking about all of your questions so that we can get to know both Amanda and her work in Colorado and a little bit about Colorado's elections questions. And so please throw your questions into the chat. And now I'm going to tell you a little bit about Amanda, but of course it's just a tiny little bit. She is somebody who attended law school at the University of Denver. She is the executive director of Common Cause Ohio. Common Cause, you see, this is how often I say Common Cause Ohio, Common Cause Colorado. And the thing to know about her, she's incredibly connected and does all sorts of different activities. And I just wanted to highlight the different things that she is, the different ways that she participates, especially her activities on boards. She is a board member of the Colorado Fiscal Institute, Focus Points Family Resource Center, and then the Colorado Hispanic Bar Association. And so, one of the things that I think about a lot of times is how is it our work on democracy connects to our community as a whole. And so I'm really going to begin this conversation with Amanda as an opportunity to get to know her a little bit. And so, Amanda, are you ready for, your 50 questions right in a row?
I am, and thank you so much for having me today. It's great to see everybody.
So your first question is super easy. Where did you grow up, Amanda?
I grew up in a very conservative suburban town in California. And so I moved out to Colorado in 2008 to go to law school.
Well, and what led you to actually stay in Colorado? How did you make that decision?
Yeah, I mean, I love LA, and I think Los Angeles will always sort of feel like home. But there's a lot to be said for Colorado, and chief among them is a more affordable cost of living, that is rapidly rising, but not compared to California. And so it was just so nice. I had a community here, and was able to do the work that I love and still afford a home, which is rare and rare depending on where you are in the country these days.
And what led you to think about going to law school?
Naivete. I was actually a grant writer at a boys' home. And so I was writing grants to raise money for boys who were 13 to 18 years old, wards of the state who were on probation. And I said, I could be the world's best grant writer. And I don't know that I would be changing the systems that have led these kids here, right? And I don't know that I can make sure that they have a chance, which is what I want to do. And so I'm the first in my family to go to college. I literally was at work and Googled, like, how do you do systems change work? I was like, oh, law school. How do you go to law school? And so signed up for an LSAT at work that day and bought a Kaplan book on my way home.
Wow. Well, I've always said that the river kind of pushed me along. Tell me a little bit about how the events surrounding you and how your life kind of pushed you along so that you ended up at Common Cause.
Yeah. So it was a little bit of a roundabout path, and it's not in that I've always worked at nonprofits, and so I had worked with our local State Voices table, which is how I got to know Colorado Common Cause. I really see this work as civil rights work, right? That a lot of the work that we do in Colorado, and obviously Common Cause throughout the nation, and I know the League is similar here, really leads with a racial justice lens of how do we make this better? We know that historically our democracy has not worked for everyone. And so, I do this work and I came to Common Cause to say, all right, like how do I spend, full time and obviously more than full time, my time sort of shifting the tides, right? And I think that organizations like the League of Women Voters and like Common Cause are somewhat unique in our approach and the work that we get to do. So that has always been my heart, that racial justice, democracy, and equity and belonging have all been core parts of the things that I like working on. And so when this position became available, I was pretty excited about it.
Well, no, it's interesting to think about the people who are often attracted to the work at Common Cause or the work on democracy issues are people who think a lot about different systems. And I think, as a country, we've been thinking a lot more about systems of injustice. And, one of the things they often say is when you start thinking about all of these different systems, it's hard to kind of figure out, how to actually take action. And so, can you tell me a little bit about like how it is you pick specifically democracy work rather than, when I was thinking about you're writing grants to help young boys, like thinking through like why did you pick this system rather than another?
Yeah, right. I mean, we all have the things that are most important to us, whether that's, it's Pride Month, whether that's LGBT rights, whether that's, I have dogs that will probably bark at some point during this, and like animals are my loves. And, all of us, and that's part of what I do in my volunteer time, right? Is I volunteer to a food shelter for pets. Um, but it's not my full-time work because I really think that if you want to change a system, right? Like no matter what the cause you care about, whether it's guns or it's equal rights or it's whatever, you know, we don't stand a chance at making effective change if our core systems of democracy aren't working, right? Today we're going to be talking a lot about voting and what that looks like in Colorado, but if our systems around redistricting or voting rights or being able to understand the votes that are being taken in our state houses or in Congress, right? If we can't have a voice in all of those processes, I don't know how we change anything else, right? Like if the systems are rigged against us, how can you effectuate change? And so we need to be working on those core systems to ensure that they eventually work for everyone in ways that they probably never have.
Can you tell me a little bit if you have a favorite book or movie you'd like to recommend to people, just to give people a sense of what you're actually like?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a nerd. We're all nerds, right? It's like a Monday afternoon, and we're all tuned in here. Um, but during the pandemic, I have been reading constantly. I think I've read 30 books so far this year. That's been like one of my coping things, I guess. Um, Gosh, I read all kinds of things. For fun, I just finished, Eleanor Oliphant is completely fine, which is like fun and great. Um, and I've also I read some nerdier stuff. She sent me Eyes Flow about sort of the way our cognitive processes work and when we're actually happiest and doing our best is always interesting.
Well, thank you for sharing that. The other thing is, folks, pop in your favorite book into the chat, because one of the things that we need to be doing right now is sharing the things that we love. I think we're slowly coming back to spending time with one another. But please pop in a movie that you just saw that you think is really meaningful. If there's a book that you recently read that you just think is the best, I noticed Red Tent is in here. So people start sharing your favorite things, and then at the end we'll make sure that you actually get a nice list of all of these different books. All right, I'm about to shift gears into your professional life and a little deeper. So, one of the things that we do with the league is Common Cause and the league and a bunch of other people. We're part of this long-term Fair Districts Coalition. Now, what is kind of hilarious is, I started working with the league on redistricting reform in the 1990s. So kind of long-term, but not as long as the league, which has been at it, since like the 70s and 80s. Our first citizen initiative on redistricting reform was in 1981. And we've had all of these different names for our coalitions. So that what I was about to say that I thought was so hilarious is in 2011, so 10 years ago, our coalition name was the Ohio Campaign for Accountable Redistricting. Yeah, total mouthful. So we're down to just being fair districts. So we're fair districts. And so I wondered a little bit about like the challenges, especially your work with state voices, kind of the challenges and what you really think works when it comes to coalition building.
Yeah, I mean, we all love and hate coalitions, right? I think that we have all done some of our best work in coalition because we know that you can't do anything as a solo person or a solo organization, right? This is the importance of organizing. This is the importance of coordinating and coming together is, it's never going to happen if it's just us. So when we think about any of the successes, that I've personally had in my professional life or that we've had as an organization, it's never been something we've done alone, right? And so I love coalitions for those reasons. And then I hate coalitions for all the reasons we all hate coalitions, right? Of like that it'll be ineffective or like that one person can never get calendar invites. And like, why did your calendar not work? Right. So whether it's the little logistics things or those bigger picture pieces that sometimes feel personal because all of this work is so important to everybody who does it, right? You're not doing it because you don't care, and then when you care it starts feeling a little personal. And so I think that the core of good and functional coalitions is one, a foundation of trust, right? That when you're in those coalition meetings and you're not sure if you can trust the other partner, or you're not sure if they're acting in good faith or all of that, those are the ones that feel a little bit miserable. But the ones that feel amazing are when you walk into, a physical or a virtual room and you're like, oh my gosh, these are the people who are my people, right? These are the people that really care about getting fair districts. These are the people that really care about getting voting rights that work for everybody. You know, those are the moments where it's like, yeah, you can be your best because you can trust your coalition and you can say the hard things and you can say the really good celebratory things. And so I think it's establishing that trust early on that's so important.
Well, Anne, I'm going to head this off and say Nazek had her hand raised, and she's one of my good coalition partners. Nazek, did you have something you wanted to say? Maybe it was unintentional. All right, well, let's do this. I'm going to start asking you some questions. So I know that you have done election protection somewhat similarly to the kind of ongoing work that we have done here in Ohio. And I go back and I think, in 2004, we had these incredibly crazy long lines. We slowly made some different changes. So we have, no fault absentee early vote, and you can vote in person for the 30 days before the election, and you can vote by mail with no excuse. That was passed in 2006, and we've had and we've made some changes that have really opened things up. And I guess I wondered a little bit about like your election protection work, a little bit about how elections have changed in Colorado as well.
Yeah. So similar path, right? I think that when we see the national headlines about voting laws and policies that are working for voters and voting laws and policies that aren't working for voters, it's easy to think that that is something that happens overnight, right? We see, these big protests happening, in Georgia or in Texas, and we think that that's the only moment that is about voting rights, and of course it's not. Right, that the League of Women Voters and Common Cause throughout the country knows that this is year-round work, and it's not just work that happens in even years, right? That we are constantly doing election protection work, trying to create and pass policies that are going to improve those processes for voters the next time around. And so very similarly, I think that Colorado is seen as having some of the best election laws in the country. We're pretty proud of them. We think we're pretty great. But it was, 15, 20 years of work before we passed sort of our big overhaul policy back in 2013. And that's a law that we continue to improve. So like you, in the early 2000s, we passed where you didn't have to have a reason for getting a mail ballot, right? You could just say, I want it and I want to permanently get it. And so the majority of Colorado voters had already signed up to be on that list by the time we passed our big overhaul law in 2013. In 2013, we did a number of things that we were pretty excited about. The first of which is that we automatically mail a ballot to every registered voter. Right. So if you were registered to vote in October, there's sort of a rolling scale for when they mail those out. But if you're registered to vote in October, you automatically get a ballot in the mail, whether or not you've requested it for that year or any other year. You can then vote that ballot, fill it out on your coffee table, take a couple days to think about it, ask your friends and neighbors what they think about different ballot initiatives or policies. And then you can drop it in a mailbox, send it back. You can drop it in a drop box anywhere in your county. So it doesn't have to be the one that's near your house or anything like that. Or you can go vote in person at any voter service and polling center in your county. And those are also open similarly to Ohio, it sounds like, several weeks before the last day of the election. And then in 2013, we also created same-day voter registration in Colorado. So, if your ballot didn't show up at your house because you forgot to update your address, you can go to any voter service and polling center in your county, update your address. You can vote in person that same day, or you can take a ballot home with you if you need a couple days to think about it. And so all of those reforms did kind of happen in that sweeping package in 2013. And then since then, we've also updated those, right? Because we learned things about how voters like to vote, right? What is easiest for them, what works for them, what doesn't work for them. And so we've done two relatively large kind of overhauls where we've learned things, in part through our election protection efforts, right? We'll get calls to the hotline. And if it's the same thing over and over again where people aren't understanding how to vote, it's like, oh, we probably need to work on updating that so that it actually works for voters.
A couple questions that are in the chat, and so I'm going to take this one. How many drop boxes do you have per county?
Yeah, so our drop boxes, and I'm glad I looked this up ahead of time because I would not have remembered it off the top of my head. I thought this would come up. So we require a number of drop boxes depending on the size of the county, the number of registered electors in that county. Colorado has 64 counties, and kind of along the middle of the state is our major highway, so that's I-25. And there's several kind of larger cities. Denver is kind of the center of the state-ish, but kind of along that I-25 corridor is where most of our bigger counties are. And then kind of as you get to the outer parts of the state, it becomes more rural. And so as an understanding for those smaller counties, right? Denver is going to have a robust elections team with dozens of employees that can make sure that the system goes really well and serves all of the voters. For a smaller county like Conejos or Saguache, which are in southern Colorado, they're not going to have the same number of resources because they don't have the same number of people. And so acknowledging that, we've got tiers for how many drop boxes you have to have in your county, and it depends on the size of your county. So if you have more than 250,000 active electors, which is not many of our counties, but kind of the main urban corridor, then you have to have one drop box for every 12,500 electors. On the smaller end of things, if you're a county that has less than 15,000 people in the whole county, then you only have to have one drop box. And so it kind of phases from there. But in the largest county, it's one for every 12,500 electors. And then in the smallest counties, it's really only one drop box required. So in 2020, that meant that we had 375 drop boxes throughout the state, just to kind of give you an idea.
Well, one of the challenges that we had during our election 2020 is essentially one drop box location, which was at the County Board of Elections, and then what happened were incredibly long lines.
Mm-hmm.
By that I mean long lines of cars to get to those drop boxes, and so the image that came to my mind had to do with Summit County and Akron. But this happened all over Ohio, where drop boxes at only one location became problematic, just basically navigating the city, shall we say, and not just, so challenges for both voters and for people who are just trying to get themselves to work.
Mm-hmm.
So now, one of the things that I was interested in is like, how did they come up with the formula? Like, how did that work?
Yeah, so that is a formula that we updated. Gosh, I want to say that was the 2019 update, but I could be getting my years wrong. And part of that was informed by how are voters voting, right? So in 2013, we knew that most people wanted their ballot to automatically get mailed to them, right? We knew that from the way voters were behaving prior to passing the law. But when we implemented same-day voter registration, when we implemented that everyone got a ballot mailed to them automatically if they had registered, we weren't sure exactly, are they still going to want to vote in person? Are they going to want to bring that ballot in and hand it to an election worker to see with their own eyes that it got there? Are they going to want to drop it in their mailbox at their front door? Because that's just easy, right? And what we found is that people want to drop their ballot off in a drop box. Which makes perfect sense, right? That, most people don't have stamps anymore. I don't know. Like, I'm not sure. I used to teach a college class. I'm not sure my students knew where you bought a stamp anymore. And so it makes sense that like, oh, I'll just drop it in this drop box. That way I know that it got there. And so what we found in Colorado is that 95% of voters vote the ballot that is mailed to their home. Now, that doesn't mean they mail it back, but they vote the ballot that is mailed to them instead of going in and getting one or going in and voting in person. Of the people that voted the ballot that was mailed to them, about 76% of those used a drop box. Coloradans really like drop boxes. They trust them. They know they're secure. They know that their ballot got returned. And so then it was a collaboration between, we have a Secretary of State in Colorado that is the head of kind of all elections, and then each county has a county clerk is how our system works. And so Colorado Common Cause, a number of other advocates, a number of other advocacy groups, the Clerks Association, and the Secretary of State's office all work together to redo those formulas and figure out how do we get more drop boxes going into 2018 and 2020, because we know how much voters use them. And so it was a really sort of collaborative process. We didn't always agree, right? But that's how we ended up updating those formulas to increase the number of drop boxes that there were throughout the state. I will also say that these are the minimums. And so a number of counties have more drop boxes than are required because they know that it's a service to voters. And then the only other thing that I'll add is we do have a couple other pieces of our formula. So the first is that we have some reservations in Colorado. So Native folks, we want to make sure that they have access to a drop box. And so the tribes get input on if they want one on their land, and to make sure that they have access to a drop box. And the other requirement that we have is that for every college and university that has more than 2,000 enrolled students, they also get a drop box. We know that students don't always have transportation. Those are hubs that even if you aren't a student, you often know where that university is. And so, and it's sort of seen as a place that of civic life, right? And so we make sure that colleges and universities also have drop boxes available.
So we got a question here that I thought was interesting. Are the drop boxes used for any other purposes?
Nope, they are They're ballot drop boxes. They are, and part of that is because they're secure, right? So I think if you were also, dropping your water bill in there or something, that would be confusing and harder to make secure. And so, no, they are not used for other purposes. And I will also say they vary in size. So just before the election in 2020, I was out in Paonia, Colorado, so a much more rural area. It's about 4.5 hours from Denver. And the county that I live in, Jefferson County, I'm a mile west of the Denver border. It's a pretty populous place. There's lots of people here. And so the drop box that's closest to me that I can walk to, it looks like a mailbox, right? It's a little bit larger than a big mailbox that would be at your post office. And in Paonia, Colorado, they had this cute little teeny tiny drop box that was like the size of my torso. And I was like, oh, isn't that adorable? Like,
Well, and it's interesting. So I noticed that Mia Lewis popped in the chat just to give a comparison that using your formula, then Franklin County, which is where Columbus, Ohio is, would have 60 drop boxes, just to give people a kind of a sense of what that would be like. Now, there have been some concerns about drop boxes and the security. And so like one of the questions that was in the chat was, are they located at government buildings? How are they in fact secured?
Yeah, so they are generally at government buildings, but I think that is more a product of ability to get space for them, right? So we've had conversations about like, our major grocery chain here is King Soopers. We're like, well, can we put them in all the King Soopers? Is that an option? Can it just like go next to where the newspapers are? But these have to be maintained. In Colorado, they do have to be under video surveillance anytime that they're open. And they're open 24/7 as we get closer to the election, right? So, and that video surveillance needs to be saved for 60 days. There's been some conversation here about what the right number of days is, because usually if there's an issue, it doesn't take you 60 days to figure it out, and then you can download the footage and make sure you have it. But right now, that's kind of where we settled to see. But all of those boxes do need to be under video surveillance. And so they are largely at places like your city and county building, or, your near a post office, or wherever your kind of central civic places in your county are. They tend to be at more of those just because that's where the county clerk is able to get space for them and have that video footage available. I will say we have discouraged county clerks from putting drop boxes at places where police offices are, where police departments are, just because not everybody in our community has always enjoyed a respectful and productive relationship with police. And so we want to make sure that nobody feels intimidated when they go to drop off their ballot. But, other than that, there is some wiggle room. As I mentioned, college campuses are one of the places. But again, I think it more has to do with where can we put them, and less about they must go in this one specific spot.
Well, and it's interesting because this, this makes me kind of think about like the costs of the drop boxes and the cost of transitioning to this. If you say 95% of the people are voting the ballot that was mailed to them, what are the costs of drop boxes? What are the costs of security? How did your state handle the cost associated with these changes?
Yeah. There are costs associated. That is absolutely true. Going into 2020, we had increased the number of drop boxes in Colorado, right? Because we know that this is what worked for voters. And our county clerks were saying that there's actually a limited number of companies that make these. And so they had to get on lists pretty early, and they were like selling out of drop boxes because throughout the country, we know that this is something that works for voters. And so, there is a cost associated with manufacturing the box, having a place where it can be installed, and being able to run that surveillance footage. I don't have those exact numbers in front of me, but know that there is a cost associated with it, and also know that there are costs associated with all elections. And so you want to make sure that you're administering those in the most culturally competent way. And for Colorado, that is drop boxes.
Yeah, that's interesting, because one of the things I started to wonder about as you were talking about the number of people that use the drop boxes, it made me wonder if there different communities use them differently. If there whether it was just kind of on board, most people, most voters, all voters, whether there was an actual difference, as you talked about cultural competence, but I started thinking about the reservations and like how that differed.
Yeah, so we see that more with our voter service and polling centers. So we have a voter service and polling center model where you can go to any VSPC in your county to vote. And we typically don't have lines, right? It's that's not saying it doesn't happen. We do get lines usually on the last day or two of the election. But typically, because most people are returning those ballots by mail or Dropbox, we don't get as many lines. I think that's a really important part about having, sounds like, enough drop boxes so that you don't then have lines at the drop boxes. So we see that more with who's using VSPCs, right? We know that the ones on college campuses tend to get lines at them. We also, in 2018, the city of Denver had recently redone our Union Station. So if you come to Denver, if y'all come to vacation out here, Union Station's like a cool place now. It has like fancy restaurants, like a cocktail bar. It's real cute in there. But they used it as a voter service and polling center in Denver for the first time in 2018. And we actually did end up with like 3-hour lines. And we were like, huh, why did that happen, right? And I think it was just, it was a hub where people already were. They were passing through there to get to and from work, and said, oh, I guess I'll just vote on my way, to or from work. And everybody had the same great idea. And so we more see those differences in in-person voting, less around who's using the Dropbox, just because it is, so convenient for everyone.
Now, is there a formula for how many kind of places and counties there are for this kind of early voting? And I also kind of wondered a little bit about, and I noticed there was a question in the chat that had to do, well, what's your actual election day like?
Yeah.
I guess that's a two-parter. How's that?
Yeah, I think our election day is probably a little bit quieter than your election day. And, we do still have lots of folks that either prefer to vote on the last day of the election, right? Especially if it's a presidential, because there's that excitement around this is the day that we're all doing the thing. Or we have folks that have busy lives and that's when they were finally able to do it. But I think that underscores the importance of having all of these different ways that you can vote. Is all of our lives are different. All of our lives are complicated. And so we need to have systems that are able to meet voters where they are. And so for us, that's drop boxes, that's being able to mail your ballot, that's having like we said, a drop box on every corner would be fantastic. I will say everywhere that I have lived in the last, since 2013, I've always been able to walk to a drop box. You mentioned how many that like, oh, that would be 60 in a county. Yeah, I mean, think about it. If you put 60 throughout a county, like, yeah, that they're pretty accessible. So it does mean that we have quieter last days of the election, but I also think that we have a fervor around voting. Consistently, we have some of the top turnout rates in the nation. I think we've been second to Minnesota for the last couple cycles. And I think that's because, it is pretty convenient. And there's also sort of this like, oh yeah, I got my ballot in the mail. Did you get yours? I've dropped mine off. Have you dropped yours off? Right? Like, there's been lots of like selfies of people at the ballot box, like I'm putting it in, which is really good. And I think that culture is really beneficial for all of us.
Now, I was thinking about people that are without homes or are doing that couch surfing thing. How does this work for them?
Yeah, so those numbers are based on active electors. And the only way that you really become inactive on our Colorado voter rolls is if a piece of election material gets returned to your county clerk, your election administrator, right? So ballots are not forwardable in Colorado. So if you've moved, if you've lost your home, something like that, and your ballot gets returned, then you would be inactive. All you have to do, and because we have same-day voter registration, works out okay, is you just have to go into a VSPC in your county and update your address or whatever.
Well, and for those of us who are acronym challenged, VSPC.
Thank you. Voter Service and Polling Center. Lots of words, right? For the place where you vote.
Yes.
Voter Service and Polling Center. And so if you are somebody that is experiencing homelessness, you don't have an address right now, we do have it in our election code that, when you go into a voter service and polling center, you identify where you usually are, right? So if you are somebody who says, yeah, I'm usually in this park and that's kind of where I am, they use that as your residence for what precinct that, you're getting that ballot for. The other thing is, your ballot can be mailed to a mailing address. So if you have a friend that, that's where you get your mail, or you have a shelter that allows you to have an address there, your residence doesn't have to be the place where your ballot is mailed. So you can still do it that way.
So this gets into, one of the questions that, a lot of folks have, which is you're mailing folks their ballots. They're not applying for it the way that we do. And, are there security concerns? How do you ensure that the voter is the person who actually cast that ballot, or that the person is actually eligible?
Right. So you do, if you vote in person here, you do have to show some sort of ID. When you register, most people register using their Colorado ID, so they put their little number down or whatever. When you get your ballot in the mail, you do have to sign the envelope that it's returned at, and we verify every single signature. We do have signatures every year that appear to mismatch. Usually that's because the signature file is pretty bare for somebody. So we get a lot of signature verification requirements for newer voters, right? So maybe when I registered to vote, I turned 18, I registered to vote immediately, I got super excited, and I signed my name beautifully, right? But then maybe when I voted, I signed how I actually do on my credit card. And so if they only had my pretty signature on file and they got my credit card signature and said, these don't look the same, Amanda, right? So then I get something that says, hey, we're concerned this might not be you. Is this you? And then you have to sign and say, yep, that's me. Sorry, I goofed up my signature. And also here's a picture of my ID. There's actually, it's when you cure your ballot, you can cure it via text now.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so we have an online text program where I can just take a picture of a valid ID and say, nope, that's me. I did actually vote. And so we have virtually no problems with those sorts of security requirements at all.
Well, and it's just amazing when you think about how incredibly convenient you're talking about doing this. Now, can you tell me a little bit? I was really interested. I'm somebody who comes from the middle of nowhere. In Australia, they call that whoop whoop, which I always loved, the hinterlands. And so I was really interested, in that notion, that notion of the rural folks only having one, because sometimes you have to drive a really long way there. And so you had mentioned that their counties can actually do more than one. How do they figure this out, and what's the process for that? And are they receiving additional funds from the state if they actually need that?
So I should also mention, there's a public input process once election plans are filled out. So our county clerk and recorders have to fill out election plans, and they detail where voter service and polling centers are going to be, where these drop boxes are going to be, right? And that's it. That's both an art and a science of figuring out where are the populations, putting an equity lens over the top of that and saying, are we making sure that no matter who you are able to access these drop boxes? And that's both, race, ethnicity, income, political persuasion. We've had a layer of transportation, right? That if you are somewhere that is only 4 miles from a drop box, but there's no public transportation available anywhere near that drop box, well, that actually is probably not terribly accessible for lots of folks, right? And so those are absolutely parts of the equation. I will say that at our election protection hotline, some of the saddest calls that we get every year are like, it's 6:45, the ballot, the drop boxes and the VSPCs are closing at 7, and we will get calls from people in rural communities saying, well, I'm an hour from anything, right? And those are really, really hard calls to get. I think that the clerks in those rural communities do have difficult decisions to make because, they can't put them every 1,000 feet the way you might in Denver, because you have the population to support that, and it's like, well, if there's only one person who lives here, it's really difficult to get a drop box out to them. Mail might be the better option. And so I think that's the other part of it being important to have all of those, but also to look at the placement with an equity and accessibility lens.
Well, we have exactly 3 minutes left of this conversation. And I don't know about everybody else, but I was wondering about redistricting in Colorado and how things were coming together. Tell us a little bit about that, and we'll wrap up in 3 minutes.
Yeah, right. Like, I know we all get so excited about voting, and we all know how important it is that our voices be heard in elections if we are eligible. And then I feel like this redistricting thing comes up every decade, and people are like, what's that? Do I need to do something? Right. But of course, this is the foundations for how resources are allocated and how voices are heard. And so in Colorado, we are actually in the first session, the first round, the first year of using independent redistricting commissions. So we passed a ballot initiative in 2018 to end gerrymandering and to take politicians out of the process and to have everyday Coloradans be the people that draw our maps. And hopefully we get really fair maps that way. But these 12 folks that are on each of our commissions are just rock stars because they're the guinea pigs, right? They're figuring out how to do this as an independent commission for the first time in Colorado's history. So we're really excited about it. There are pieces that are going really, really well, and there are pieces that we're like, oh, we should have thought about that. And so, we're learning, and hopefully we have a really engaging process. Our testimony period is going to be in July and August, when communities get to come out and literally make their voices heard. So I'm hoping that we hear from all different kinds of people throughout the state. But
well, Ohio is with you as we move into this map making after our reforms, where we're all kind of holding our breaths and keeping a vigilant eye on the Ohio Redistricting Commission and the state legislature. Well, what I wanted to say to you, Amanda, is how much I appreciate this opportunity to ask you lots of different questions and get to know Colorado a little bit. I did notice that you might have recruited somebody who not just doesn't want to come to visit you, but might actually want to move there. Thank you, Michael, for throwing in Amanda's information there so that you can, if you want to check out a little bit more about Colorado Common Cause. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand this to our friend Nazik from the League of Women Voters, and she's going to tell us a little bit about what we can do and what kinds of things we can do together. And once again, Amanda, thank you so much.
Thank you. It was so good to see you all. And any questions you have about drop boxes, they are so great for voters, so safe and secure, and we just all love voting that way in Colorado. So if I could be of any help, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Thank you.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for joining us. Thank you, Amanda. It was a pleasure to get to hear you and listen to so much information about drop boxes in Colorado, because this is definitely the next frontier for us in Ohio, the next fight for democracy. and increasing voter access in Ohio. So what we would love for all of you to do today after listening to all this great information is to please call your legislator, call your House representative, and call Speaker Cupp and advocate for drop boxes. I'm going to throw a link to a page on our website with a script. Forgive me, I threw this together at the last second. And so you have a script there, and I'm going to also give you the information to find your legislator. You're looking for your House rep. Oops, sorry, I put the wrong, I sent that to the panelists. 1 second. All right, all of you should have, so that's that link everybody should have now to a script to call your House rep. And one more link for you to find your legislators. 1 second.
I have to say, I'm really looking forward to these events.
And that is the link to find your legislator. So call your Ohio House rep, call Speaker Cupp. It'll take you less than 1 minute to call the both of them, give them that message, and advocate for drop boxes in Ohio. Even keep in mind that even if drop boxes might not seem super important to you, they are important to the most disadvantaged people in Ohio, including the disabled, including senior citizens, and people who work long hours and just can't make it to the open ballot on election day when you necessarily can. So please go ahead and make that call. Thank you. So I think we are wrapping up for today. Thank you everybody for joining us. Take a look at the the last slide as you are heading out. We have some great upcoming events, including on June 15th, Snake on the Lake, and some other stuff. You can find all of this information on our website, by the way, lwvohio.org. Finally, we want to tell you also about a great new program through the League called Youth in Action. If you know any young people in your life who you would like to kind of point in the direction of civic engagement that is specifically catered towards youth, this is a great program. You can go there, sign up for more information. And thank you so much for joining us, everybody, today. Oh, we have an additional slide here about some other things. Franklinton Pride is coming up. Again, all of this information can be found on our website, so definitely check all of this out. Thank you. And finally, don't forget to support us by becoming a member. That ensures that you stay up to date on all the latest things that we are doing, information, events, advocacy. Becoming a member helps sustain the League long term and enables you to be a part of everything that we do and get to know other people like you who are also civically engaged and want to get other people involved and educated. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Amanda, for joining us today. Everyone have a great day.
Bye, everybody.